need. But we know there's a better way, and we're working to make throwaway go away through innovations in business and policy and our social impact campaigns.
And Sam, sorry, I'd also wanted to just remind everyone, make sure all of my panelists, when you introduce yourselves, also give us your favorite zero waste myth.
That reuse will cost us more. And I'm sure we'll dig into the details later.
Rich?
Hi, I'm Rich Grousset. I am Senior Vice President of Business Development at Reedish. Reedish is a dishware as a service company, which simply means we deliver clean food service products like reusable clamshells, for example, collect the used products, wash them in our own facility, and repeat. That's the basics. I'm sure we can get into more details later. Our current focus is on enterprise sites, we call them, but it's really pretty broad, including workplace cafeterias, sports arenas, schools, and we're based in the New York City area for now, where we have our washing facility, and plan to expand to other geographies as opportunities arise later this year. Our goal is to make reuse as straightforward and turnkey as possible, making it easy for our clients to make the switch. That's kind of it. And I will just want to mention, I've been interested in reusable since 2011. I launched my first pilot at the University of Michigan as a grad student. It's been a long, crazy road, and I feel extremely fortunate now to have a full-time job working on tackling this very important problem. And so just wanted to give a shout out to Reedish's founder and CEO, Caroline Vanderlip, for the opportunity. And that said, my favorite zero waste myth is it's the responsibility of consumers to solve our waste problems by changing their own behaviors and purchasing habits.
Thanks, Rich. And Michael?
Hi, Michael Sear. I'm co-founder and CEO of Cup Zero. We are on a mission to send zero cups to landfill. We actually started 2 years ago, working mainly with events, nightlife, concert venues, to provide a turnkey reusable cup service for them. So we plan out their sales numbers based on how many drinks they're selling. We deliver all the cups that they might need, collection points around the venue, any signage on the deposit system or policy that they have. And most importantly, after the show, we take everything back and wash it, so there's no need to waste just because you're throwing a big party. I'm also super happy to announce that in June, we're launching our Cup Zero Go app. So soon, at least in New York City, you'll be able to borrow and return a reusable cup for your coffee or juice to any participating location in the city. It works kind of like City Bike for cup. Just borrow one for free anywhere and return it anywhere as well. My favorite myth, and by favorite I mean pet peeve, that compostable items are the answer to sustainability. Most of the time, these are going into the same trash bag as everything else. And even if there is a compost program, they're most likely getting screened out down the line as a contaminant and heading to landfill anyways. So just because it has a green leaf on the packaging doesn't necessarily mean it's better for the planet.
Great, thank you. And Michael, I look forward to being able to borrow a cup and drop it off anywhere as a New York City resident. Great, so everyone, the first question I have, because I do think it's the elephant in the room, and I did refer to it a little bit, which is, how has COVID impacted the reusables movement? And what do you guys see occurring as we come back into the world? I put that into quotes. I know we're not quite sure what the world is, but as we re-enter, would love to get each of your perspectives on what has been the impact and what will we see changing. Who would like to take that first? Rich, Mike, giving your business models?
I can start.
Okay.
I'm sure the others will add flavor. Yeah, I think, when COVID hit, there was a lot of concern in the movement that reusables was going to be set back years or crushed entirely as the fears of eating food contact surfaces and getting COVID from touching things. We quickly learned from experts that wasn't how COVID spread, with scientists hundreds of scientists signing an agreement or a letter saying that, listen, you're not going to get COVID from your food container. So it was really like, well, reusables is tied to the food service industry, and so that's the next concern. If restaurants aren't open and serving food, what are reusable companies going to do? And a lot of those things came true. Reusable companies, some startups had to pause. Some switched entirely to work on their delivery models because that's all people could do. But what didn't happen is they didn't go away, for the most part. And what did happen is that we saw a huge level of awareness as people are home getting massive amounts of delivery, even more delivery than before in disposable products. Huge awareness bump, again, about the waste associated with takeout and delivery. I think it actually has benefited the reuse movement, and I think we're going to come out stronger on the tail end, despite everything else. So that's kind of my take on it. In my particular industry, I see clients, they're still interested, and many are more interested now than they were before, because they've had time to. Some of them have started new plastic reduction initiatives, like to get rid of single-use plastics. Some are planning to start those initiatives for when everyone returns to the office, because right now, if an office building has only 10% of its employees back, a lot of these operations and food service operators have time to think, and they have to think about what it's going to look like when people come back. And so you do see a few that are concerned about reusables and the perceptions of their employees in a building about the risks. But I would say the majority are seeing this as the way to go. And for the first time since in 7 years, I heard a company say, "Oh, we've been looking for something like you," or how do you compare to your competitors? And so the fact that there are competitors and they're looking for this is a huge difference, even in the last 3 or 4 years, let alone since like 2012.
I'll go. Our whole industry was wiped out. That's typically where we worked, in large gatherings of people. That was the most operational struggle for businesses to wash their own dishware, was because there was just too many and they were focused on drink sales. So from that perspective, of course, a lot of the venues that we used to work with are having a really tough time. And I think furthermore, the perception battle is definitely an uphill one that we have to all keep fighting. There's a lot of misinformation going around that, reusables are not safe, or that single use is safer. And everyone thinks about a different thing. And business owners specifically, in my experience, are concerned with what the public will think of them as a business. I talked to a coffee shop who said, we used to take people's mugs in, but then the person after them said they didn't want their food anymore because that cup had gone beyond the counter. So I think this is an uphill battle of us all saying that the science right now points to the fact that COVID or any other diseases does not really spread through surface context, and those same sanitization procedures that we've had for everything, Ebola included, are still in place and still work.
Sam, any thoughts from a policy perspective? Because I know you guys had worked on getting together that petition and really putting out information on reusables into the marketplace last summer.
Yeah, I also want to share too that, the FDA came out publicly with a statement a couple weeks ago. I have links to a couple different articles this was covered in, but just reaffirming that, COVID is not transmitted through foodware and food. And so I think that what we had to do, everyone was really scared, right? So there was lack of information. The information was evolving and changing rapidly. So I think it was just really important to make sure that the claims that were being made, or the actions that municipal governments were taking, say, to not allow grocers or cafes to accept BYO bags and BYO cups. And so the work that we had done early on with Greenpeace to come out with this public health expert statement that was signed on by over 130 medical professionals across the globe and counting, basically stating that, it's a respiratory disease, airborne. So I think we had a really important job to uphold that reusables are safe. If you are operating a food service facility, you do need a permit that is regulated. There are requirements and mandates that are set by your local public health department. So reusables are carefully monitored single-use items are not sterile. People have this perception, employees too, that they are sterile and they're safer, but the same number of hands are being transferred through, the process of a sale. So I think that the reusable item is just as safe, if not safer, because it's going through a strict washing protocol.
Great. And I know Michael had talked about this as his myth, Sam, but I'm sure, because you guys work in this space, what should people say when they're trying to promote reusables, maybe in their university or in their company, or trying to convince a coffee shop, and they say, well, we use compostables, or you can recycle the coffee cup, or you can recycle the plastic cutlery ware. As the option to reusables, people talk about recycling or composting. What are some good talking points to say back?
Sure. Well, number one, trace the compost, trace the fork. If it looks like plastic, if it feels like plastic, it's not really composted and it's going to be landfilled. Compostable items per item cost tends to be much higher than a conventional single-use item. Why are we going out and rushing to flood the market with items that our downstream processing systems cannot accept? Because there's a lot of greenwashing going on. You think, oh, if you give an employee choice, so I've been in lots of institutional dining cafes down to small restaurants, the donut shop, the cafe. If you give a consumer choice and you say, here's this thing, it's made out of corn, that's super cool. And then you give them, this item that may be recyclable or this item that's reusable. People are always going to gravitate towards, and we've seen this 9 times out of 10 through observational study, that people choose the single-use item that they think is most sustainable for the planet. And food operators are purchasing those items because they believe that that's what our customers want. And they also believe that it's more sustainable for the planet. So I think there's just a lot of, education and awareness that has to come with fiber foodware, for example, that's coated with perfluorinated chemicals and compounds that are forever chemicals that are super toxic and endocrine disrupting that don't really leave your body once they enter. So I always love to tell people, let's look at the math. Let's look at the numbers. So before we make any decisions on, hey, this item or that item or this item, I'm a realist. You want to do what's best for the business operator. But if we can show them and demonstrate that to maintain your single-use throwaway model, your status quo, that's what this looks like. This is the cost it's cost to you, the environmental impacts, the waste, the greenhouse gases that are generated from that waste. And then let's project out 3 different scenarios. If you were to go reusable for dine-in, if you were to go to reusable services for takeout, how is that going to impact your bottom line? What we've shown over years of managing the Rethink Disposable campaign for Clean Water Action is that hundreds of businesses have done a transition to reusable foodware packaging for on-site dining, and the ROI is usually 6 months or less. And once you hit that ROI, small businesses were saving upwards of $3,000 to $6,000 per year just from the avoided disposables purchasing cost, and also from reducing their trash hauling contracts, because you're just generating less material all around, which is the true zero waste model.
Got it. Oh, I'm going to have to get some of those stats from you for some of my conversations. So we've definitely seen some pilots on the reusables, and I would say that they're all subscale, right? They're small pilots with a small group of people. You usually have someone like me who's dying to do the reusable, so I sign up for it. This is really kind of thrown out to all of you, but I know that Rich and Michael, you guys are in it with your pilots yourself. What have you guys learned about what it takes to create scalable or meaningful consumer adoption of reusables? Right, we have lots of pilots, but we now need to scale.
I could start on this one, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, didn't want to cut anyone off, but yeah, this is really the nut to crack for all reusables. So it's really kind of like, well, there's no easy answer, but and there's sort of a lot of answers. So I'll try to keep it short. But what I always come back to is, and you're right, you see a lot of pilots popping up everywhere. My take is that a lot of them are still with the early adopters, still with the green-minded folks, and that makes sense, right? For most like adoption models and whatever, that's where you would want to start anywhere. But we haven't seen anyone really crack out of that and get into the, the bigger segments of the market, which is like the general mass consumer segments. And so, yeah, your question is like, why is that? I think one is that it's not available. I don't think we're actually going to see it scale until it's available at scale. So there's sort of a chicken egg problem. So for example, in a city of like New York, 10 to 15,000 typical restaurants, or 25,000, or it used to be 25,000 food service operations. And if one person visits one restaurant and then doesn't go back there, really, this reusable thing has to be available at all the 200 different restaurants they're going to that year to capture that person. And so we haven't really seen something that's available everywhere, and so there's sort of a chicken and egg. How do you invest in something when there's a leap of faith that people will do it, right? And so I think the other side to that is, what we need to scale is public commitments from municipalities. If we're looking at scaling at a citywide program, partnerships with private companies like, Reedish or Cup Zero or whoever, if we're talking about massive scale, we're talking about reuse bins on street corners, right? There's obviously public and municipal concern about how this would look at that scale. But how do you get people to actually do it, right? And that's where I think the other trick is, how do you economically provide a whole reuse system, minimizing the burden on the consumer, and so I think as soon as we start charging consumers fees, adoption drops, right? And it's pushing us more towards the smaller early adopters. So it's like finding the system that makes it as similar as possible as today's experience with disposables, or, as we like to say, easy as throwaway. And it's not that easy, right? That takes time and money. And so that's exactly where most startups are now, right? Like if you look all around, like that's what they're trying to figure out. So we need more startups too, with new models and testing things out. And and I'm sure Michael can speak to this directly, and Samantha, what she's seen. But that's sort of I have like actually 2 more paragraphs of notes I wrote on this, but I'll stop there for everyone else's sake.
I'm sure we've all been thinking about it for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And Michael, so I think what Rich was saying was, consumers are only going to adopt when it's ubiquitous and it's like cost efficient for them, like it's not expensive and it's as easy as disposable. What are your thoughts on that specific comment? And I think that talks about business adoption, right? Like to get scale, you need a lot more businesses to adopt. Yeah, what are the barriers there?
I totally agree. There's, I'm not sure if it was Steve Jobs, but someone in the innovation space, to have innovation adopted, you either need it to be a brand new concept with a familiar design that people are used to, or it's a new design on the same concept. And I think right now we need to have the same concept with a new design, so to speak. And that speaks to, it needs to be cost effective or similar to what the businesses are spending now. It needs to be just as convenient and cost effective for the users as well. Because right now users can access disposables anywhere for free at any time. And I think a lot of small scale pilots are inherently flawed, because if you have 1 or 2 locations, you're not really setting the program up for success, because people really need to go back and forth to that one specific location. That's not an accurate portrayal of what everyday life is. People move around, especially when the city's up and running. People go back and forth and need to have access to this everywhere. But you need to make a similar business case to what it is now. Businesses either want to save money or make money, and you have to fit into that parameter, or at least be the same as what they're currently doing. And it needs to be easy for users to do as well. So I know with our coffee program, we want to launch like trash cans. We want to have enough map pins in an area so that you don't have to walk more than 1 or 2 blocks to find the next drop-off point. So it should be just as easy as throwing away your disposable cup.
Well, what are the logistical challenges of that, Michael, of that model, right? Because you need to then have almost a logistical system set up in the city.
In time, I think so. And how we are promoting this is that the coffee shops that have dishwashers should start washing themselves, so that there doesn't need to be this third-party logistics delivery engine going around. There will be a tipping point where that will be needed. But our hypothesis right now, and look, I think we're all hypothesizing until it's done, is that, you know, a portion of their sales that is being switched over should not be too much of a burden on their operations to wash themselves. In which case, make it as lean as possible. Make it so you don't need to add on an additional logistics model just to get this thing working. So right now, you can pick up a cup from a shop and drop it off at another shop, rather than having a separate bin somewhere else that someone has to go around and physically collect. It does add cost to pay people to drive trucks around.
And Sam, you kind of see the entire country, right? Because you're working with lots of pilots and stuff. Any thoughts on or insights on what it takes to scale? And you might want to bring in the city element as well, I think, because that would be a great topic to bring up.
Yeah, I think in response to the last question, which was about how do we drive and accelerate consumer demand and then participation in these programs, because we really can't do it without them. That's when I'm thinking about policy, right? So if we can pass local policies, whether it's at the local, you know, the city, county, state, or federal level, you know, Upstream has worked on some of the most aggressive and innovative foodware and litter reduction policies in the country. And we have been successful at passing quite a few here in California. But basically, it's not going to be up to the consumer to be the one to make the change. It's going to be up to the businesses, the generators of all that waste and that litter. That cities then expend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to fund, you know, litter abatement and cleanup programs. But that's like putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery. And that's a short-term fix. And that's not really thinking long-term sustainable in mind, right? So I think that the policies that we're seeing are, you know, one, mandating reusable foodware for on-site dining. Two, never giving out accessory packaging like ketchup packets and napkins and forks and straws unless those are specifically requested by the customer. Three would be to ban the use of any single-use foodware packaged item that cannot be locally, not just collected, but actually processed locally by your hauler and their MRF. So we want to make sure that if there's a fiber foodware that is permissible and allowable in the city, that it's not coated in perfluorinated compounds and that it is actually accepted by your local hauler and processed. So, and then as COVID hit, so these are great, momentum was happening before COVID. It was really exciting actually. And then now, of course, you know, we've stalled, I think, on a few of the policies, but seeing the explosion of packaging and operations in the takeout and delivery space, we're working that now into those local policies with ideas such as like setting benchmarks and goals for by 2025, you know, 25% of delivery and takeout is in reusables, and then it would keep incrementally going up. And I think that if this, and sorry, one big piece of component of the legislation is a charge. There was a time before California had the state plastic bag ban, and 146 cities also passed their own, you know, bag bans before it went to the state, that people didn't bring reusable bags. There was a time when there wasn't curbside recycling. Like, we can totally innovate to this a reusable economy that not only creates jobs, but reduces global pollution, local pollution, such as waste and litter. And yeah, so I think if you put a charge, why would that be free in the first place? Let's disincentivize the stuff that is literally lasts thousands of years, but we use for minutes and then toss. And let's make the reusable systems free. Oh, and then the money that we collect from the charges on the takeout containers and cups, that funnels the city's budget to be able to issue RFPs to hire companies such as yours and to install infrastructure for dishwashing and to just have it like a municipal service like you do for trash and sewer. So policy, I think, really has the teeth. And if we can show through these early adopters and these pilots the results, we need data, we need case studies, and we need numbers. Because in Berkeley, when that first disposable foodware law passed, we were able to produce dozens of Rethink Disposable case studies that showed, even though businesses are screaming, you know, from the mountaintops, this is going to kill my business. I won't be able to stay afloat. But we showed over and over again that businesses that make the change, of course, there is an initial setup cost, but it's not nearly as big as they think it was. They can implement reusables even if they only have a 3-sink system and not a mechanized dishwasher. And when you account for the setup costs and the ongoing cost to maintain a reusable operation, you're still saving money from trying to maintain the old bad way. So I think policy is a really big push for moving forward business innovation in tandem with the policy work.
Great. And so, Michael, what would you need as you're putting in place your new program? What would you need from the city of New York to help you scale or make it successful?
Yeah, I think something that would help would be some kind of fee or levy, just like we have the plastic bag fee. It's been shown to dramatically decrease usage of plastic bags. And I think then, Sam, you could probably speak to this better than I can, but the psychology of being charged for something seems to be a pain point, even if it's a nickel. And I think those things, public facing, need to happen. And potentially a tax on what people are serving as well. Businesses are already paying for their trash removal, but I don't think it's strong enough right now just to have that. I think there needs to be more of an incentive. And to your point, Sam, about tracing the waste stream down, if there are going to be shops that say bought it here, compost it here, that needs to be verified. There needs to be verification that a compost truck is actually coming there, and wherever it's going, it's not being screened out. And I think the general state of mind is that this is good for the planet, and then magic is happening somewhere else. And that's just frankly not the case. I know it exists somewhere, but it's few and far between.
Got it. I think that's a really important point around the data transparency or data integrity. It came up yesterday in a panel I did on ESG data and waste data, because people are not sure now, is something actually being composted or something actually being recycled. Rich, could you talk about the economics of reuse versus disposable? I know Sam and Michael both touched on it a bit. It would be interesting to know, within your model, are you able to say it's cheaper for companies to use your business or not? And if it isn't, what are the other ancillary benefits that would tip the scale for them?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this at Reedish because the reality is, an example is workplace cafeterias. The variation in the products, the amount of variety in the products they use and the cost of those products is all over the place. So, the challenge is pricing something. You can't just go in and say, well, we're cheaper, we're more expensive, until we know what they're using. Some of them could be using the least expensive products possible, right? And we know these products range, if we're talking about clamshells, right? They get down below 10 cents for, someone at some point has to use the expanded polystyrene word on this webinar. So I went there for places that still have that available. It's pennies, right? And so there's no way we're going to compete against that on an apples to apples basis. And some of them, when they're buying separate lids and bases for a takeout container, are paying as much as 80 cents even, and that's probably the or maybe $1. I see Sam's reaction. She's familiar with the product list as well. So at Reedish, our intent is to be cost neutral when you take into account all of the factors, right? Not just the price of a single use container. It's the waste, it's the managing the inventory, it's breaking down, these single use products come in cardboard boxes, right? How much time does it take to break down those cardboard boxes? Are you paying someone to recycle them, or are you selling them on the market? There's so many variables from when you click a button to order these things through it goes through your whole system and then it ends up in the trash. The costs are all over the place. And so we intend to be as cost neutral as possible, but we also need to be economically viable as a self-sustaining business, right? And so right now priced in the middle there somewhere. We like to price similar to how they buy disposables, which is on a per container per use basis. So it's all inclusive and it makes it easy. But yeah, I think this goes back to the previous question. If you're talking to a corporate site, for example, cost is always an issue, right? And some of them are like, oh yeah, you're right on. And other ones are like, oh, that seems expensive. And it's like, well, if you had to internalize all the externalities of that disposable, the cost would be more on par or more expensive than what we do, right? Including like life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, waste hauling, So if we got EPR or some other fees involved in these single-use products, we would suddenly become a no-brainer for everyone, not just for the companies using higher end products. Anyway, I hope I didn't offend my employer with anything I said there, but that's the economics, and I'll save the rest for another job, but another time. Does that make sense to everyone else on the panel? I'm curious to hear what
Yeah,
Michael?
I was actually going to piggyback off that. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
You can piggyback. I'll go after.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, clearly when you're thinking about the environmental impacts and the cost impacts, right, there is going to be a break-even point. So when you compare it 1-to-1, yeah, the reuse is not going to win. But when you compare like, oh, I only have to use this 7 times and this is designed for 1,000 uses, I think you kind of start to see the case that we're trying to demonstrate. And then also one of the restaurants here, so I'm partnering on a new pilot called Serve It Safe. It's a partnership with Dishcraft Robotics and the city of Palo Alto. And our restaurant owner, who's going to be launching on 4/20 to coincide with the launch of Earth Day that week, he's like, yeah, I mean, my containers I'm using right now cost me, he's paying about 24 cents a pop. And we're offering a dishwashing service at 50 cents a container to pick them up, to clean them with a 24-point touchless inspection system with robots, like the highest clean you could possibly go for, and then to deliver them each day, clean ones. And the owner was very happy to pass off the increase in cost to the customer. And it really, the sky didn't fall down. It was like, okay, maybe the system that I want to do, because sustainability is at the core of my ethos and my business model, but we don't have any solutions that I can do right now during COVID. So if you're going to go forward with a reusable option and pay a third-party vendor to provide this awesome level of service, then pass off that cost, the additional, smidge of a cost to the customer on the order.
And that's a great segue. So I know for our coffee model, we're planning on being cheaper than what they can do now. But our event model, it's more expensive, but we also create a revenue stream for the venue. And I think with a little bit of creativity, there's a lot of different ways to swing it by potentially passing that 20 cents on, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about 10, 15, 20 cents, passing that on to the customer. We usually ran a deposit system for a concert. Think about it. You pay $2 extra for your first drink. You can bring your cup back and get your money back. 2 a.m. rolls around, 100% of people are not going back to get their $2 back. They're finding the true love of their life, or they're catching their Uber, whatever that might be. And this actually created a revenue stream for those events and for those vendors beyond what we were charging too. So I think there's some creativity that can be implemented. It doesn't necessarily have to be an apples to apples in all situations.
Yeah, and if I just will add one more thing, when you're serving people on reusable products, it's also sort of a premium experience compared to the disposable in a lot of cases, right? So it's also not great to compare against, say, like a fiber clamshell when you're providing someone this sturdy, beautiful transparent plastic thing, whatever, or stainless steel or whatever people out there are using, right? There's like this premium experience around it, and it's hard to get people to understand that when you're talking cost, right? But in our experience, the employees at the workplace are super happy about it, right? This is just making their lunches better. They're more satisfied with their food service experience. The food service staff actually say these products are easier for them to serve in because they don't get soggy or wilt, or they bend when they carry them. They can use one hand to serve instead of having to hold it with two. There's all sorts of these other ancillary benefits depending on, and it depends on the market segment you're in, right? So like, yes, we're reducing a lot of waste for a site that generates an office that generates 10,000 of these things a day or something, because the reduced waste, but not necessarily that doesn't translate as well to the restaurant market or the cafe market if their trash bins aren't filling up inside the cafe. So there is kind of the market by market difference in how they see those play out as well. Anyway, I'll stop there before I keep going too long.
No, that's great. I'm going to ask a question. I'm actually going to pull from the Q&A, which I thought was a really interesting question. Is how do you see different models? I know, Rich, you're like within companies, and Michael, you're looking to be more out on the street, lots of different consumers. But there could be other reusable systems also in New York City. How would you see reusable systems working with each other? How could that work? Could it work in a city? Maybe start with you, Michael. Yeah.
At some point, I do think competition will be good in the long run for policy. Because if I were a policymaker, I wouldn't want to pass something if there wasn't, an alternative out there. Obviously, I think Rich and I would want to have everything, but I think we want to push this forward anyways. And competition is a good thing. At some point, it'll probably make sense to start sharing portions of that service model. So dishwashing comes to mind. I'm not sure if there's 10 companies in New York that all of them need to have their own washing space. If there's one big one that could be used by multiple different companies, maybe someone could specialize in the delivery portion of that. And I think we'll start to see that as time goes on, that some of these reuse models might start specializing in one area of that. Tech's another portion too, right? Like someone might specialize in just a checkout, check-in process.
Sam, you seeing anything in other markets?
Yeah. Plus, Michael. I think we need a healthy level of competition to drive the market and innovate forward. Having said that, though, I think this still is so new, and we are still we're like a fish swimming up the waterfall. We're still trying to break through the barrier and reach this, peak plastic awareness. So everyone knows and gets it and wants to participate and demands for these types of services. So at this stage, I think it'd be great. We've got, I think it's almost 150 different reuse service providers on Upstream's website. It's like the most current and robust list of businesses that I know of to date. So I welcome folks to go there. But yeah, so competition, I think that businesses and communities especially all have different needs. So I think that it's important that, functionality, the business model, is it tech enabled? Is there an app? Is it a membership fee? There's so many different ways that all the businesses are kind of putting their business model together. So I think it would be great that, Community X that I'm working with in the North Bay here, they will not use any plastic, even if it's durable plastics and polypropylene. They are requesting that this entire city cup program has to be stainless steel. Stainless steel can be very cost prohibitive for most accounts. So, we're in a little bit of a pickle where there still needs to be better materials, better products, but I don't know that we're there yet. So yeah, I think that having choice and options. However, a city could issue an RFP and contract with one, reuse service provider, or maybe it's a combining of contracts. There's a dishwashing provider and a reuse service provider, but just like with trash, right? So you could have an exclusive franchise agreement with a city, or there could be 10 different haulers that could work in a city. And I think that we can look to similar types of models for funding and programs and, mirror our reuse efforts on that.
When you talk about like city issuing an RFP, do you mean maybe they're requiring all coffee shops to use a reusable cup? Or
sort of. No, I think that putting out an RFP, say the city needs a trash hauler, they're going to put out a request for proposals, and X number of trash haulers can bid on that project, and the city will award the contract to one for a certain time period. So in my mind, I'm thinking of, city X is passing a policy in the coming year that's going to make a 25-cent charge on cups for takeout. So hopefully the city is moving forward in tandem with that to identify the amount of work that will be need to do to get the businesses aware, B, complying, and then there needs to be some solution for the takeout, so not the burden doesn't rest on the consumers. That's where I think the city would issue an RFP and look for the best, reusable cup service that they can find in their city to deploy as a solution to not being charged 25 cents for your cup. Because BYO cup used to be the thing we were talking about 10 years ago, like, oh, we'll just carry a bag full, like a duffel bag full of, I've got my containers, my straws, my utensils, my cups, my whatever, right? My reusable napkin even, I used to carry this stuff around. So how much better will it be? And we'll never reach the goal that we need to do in terms of source reduction and ending this toxic packaging. So what we really need is to have convenient, accessible, fun, easy solutions that are available at all cafes, that are available in all restaurants, or even available for delivery, right? So that's the vision, I think, for the future.
Well, I think that's interesting because I totally forgot the BYO push, and I still have all of that, and I fail 50% of the time to bring it. And then, I'm making sure that Rich and Michael don't see me when I'm out in New York City because I'm taking a throwaway item. Like, oh no, my brand is like that. I don't do it. So I think that's totally right. There's all this whole thing around convenience. When we did our prep call, we had talked about a MRF for reusables, which I thought was a really interesting idea. Does anyone want to take that on and explain it and see what it would take to make that happen?
I'll take a stab, although I'm not sure I'm the most qualified on here to talk about it, but maybe at least I'll give the others time to refine their answers. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting, first of all, pluses to Michael and Sam, both on what they said about competition and everything else. I agree 100%. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. But yeah, so this whole, New York City is very interesting because of the sheer volume of everything, right? It's kind of like the best playground for folks that want to experiment in this space in general. So I could see something like a MRF for reusables here, because it could easily scale to efficiencies quickly. So the real question is this, right? Like, how would we get a system in place? Would it look like our current Department of Sanitation system, where trucks and other things, or bikes or electric vehicles, are roaming around the city collecting reusables from restaurants and apartment buildings and cafes and office buildings, and bringing them to either one huge processing center or like several, reasonably sized one, whatever the optimization model shows, but right, and then sorting them out. Right, it's like sorting them and washing them all and then packaging them back into, like, here's all your cups, that will go back to wherever they need to go back. Here's all your plates, here's all your to-go containers, here are all your utensils. I mean, that is sort of a dream, right? I could see that as being the future. It would be amazing. I have a hard time visualizing what needs to happen between where we are now and that, because it seems like there's just so far to go, and there's a lot of, as we've mentioned before, people are still looking at the risks and the costs, and not just the risks of like COVID. That's not, I'm getting at like risks of like losing these things, right? And they're looking for case studies of programs of similar size, like, oh, I'm a business with 5,000 employees in my building, can you show me an example of someone else is doing this, and it's like, how about you're the first? So that's kind of where we are today, and it's hard to imagine we got such a leap of faith and commitment and investment to get to the MRF idea. But the only other question about that, because I do see it as the future, and is it a company like Reedish, or Cup Zero, or is it a municipal thing? And that's really kind of where I ended my thought. I ran out of kind of ideas, so I'd love to hear Sam and Michael continue on that.
Sam, maybe I'll play devil's advocate, and then you can probably, I think you'll be good to wrap this one up. So I used to work for a waste hauler in MRF. Some people know that. So for me, that exact replica of that model, I don't think would be the answer, because those trucks are designed to crush things as much as possible, then spread them out and then recrush them into these things. So I think existing MRFs and haulers, I personally currently can't see that, but I think the mechanism of a route going around, driving around, and then this central, I think that shared washing facility that I had mentioned or dreamed of before would be that MRF, right? Where a lot of different streams of reusables are going to the same place. They're being washed and then sorted for redistribution after that. But Sam, I know you've been thinking about this, so I'll pass it on to you.
Well, I think that we see a perfect example with the loop model, right? So they are partnering, and let's be honest, this is not an easy thing, right? So this would require all hands on deck, pushing forward policies, building relationships and partnerships with people that we probably never would have thought before. But just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean that we can't accomplish it and make it a success. So I would just say, you know, I think it's Freiburg in Germany. My understanding is there is a very successful citywide scaled reuse program. I'm not sure who's running the back-end logistics. I probably should know that. But looking at the loop model, you know, they're only going after, what did they woke up and said, what are we experts at? What's our niche? Our niche is picking up materials and sorting them and then processing them at their appropriate places. And that really got me thinking about who is out there running routes every day? Like, is it the linen companies? Is it the trash companies? Is it the third-party food service delivery companies? I mean, just right there, I feel like I want to identify who's out there running routes every single day and touching at least weekly every business, every institution, and every resident. So naturally, that's where the thinking came from, which is that, you know, haulers are experts at running the logistics of routes. They're experts at collecting materials and then sorting them to the appropriate place. And that's what Loop is doing, but they're only working it with the biggest brands out there, because if we don't hit the economies of scale, we cannot offer the reuse solution at the same cost as the disposable item. And you can't say like, oh, well, if we have disposable cups, that's causing $4,000 in waste hauling fees down here. Like you can't really make that connection as well. So what I would say, and I'm also starting another pilot where the hauler is at the table as a partner with the community and the Chamber of Commerce and the business district there. And it was such a cool idea where they're like, we're going to take our old decommissioned trash cans and paint them like a bright yellow or a bright orange. And that's going to be, and support the collection of those. So yes, you have front loading trucks, you have side loading trucks. I have tons of work experience with the haulers. But I think what we're saying is that we're not trying to pick these up using the same old way, right? Like we're not doing a side loading and we're not going to dump it in. These are food wares and beverage wares that touch people's mouths. So logically, yes, there would have to be, just like you have a different type of truck that runs out for trash, you've got a different type of truck that's running out there for recycling and a different in California for compost or organics. So I'm just saying the flatbed truck that like delivers all of your rolling carts to any account in California, we could adapt one of those flatbed trucks for picking up the reuse bin. So my vision for the future is where every home and every business, you have maybe the landfill bin, but you've definitely got the recycling bin, you've got your organics bin, and the third or fourth bin is your reuse refill bin. And ideally, it would be for everything from food and beverage wares, but also your home, you know, consumer and retail goods. So it's a vision, I think, for, and I've also spoken with Recology. So Recology being one of the biggest haulers in California with a very aggressive sustainability plan, their innovation team is interested in learning and hearing about these ideas, because in California, since we have a mandate to get to 90%, you know, diversion from landfill, I think by 2020, we may not have hit that because of COVID. That drives the market, right? And so again, these policies really do have teeth in helping us achieve the change we want to see in the future. But so what does that mean? Trash is coming way down. So the haulers make money off of the tons of trash that they haul to the landfill. So they're losing money with trash. We're going to see trash going, you know, in the negative direction. and recycling imploded. And I mean, what, less than 9% of all plastics are even recycled today because of China's national sword policy. So, you know, they're not, and that was really lucrative. So they're not making money off the recycling either now. So I'm trying to meet with them to say, maybe there's market potential for you, that if you can figure out how to offer these services, like, to me, that would be, you know, in the business's best interest to sustain into the future. And what would it look like if the hauler, you know, wasn't the representation of trash, but was the reuse economy supporter, the main like component that we needed to make this whole thing jive. And one last thing I want to say about that is interoperability. So what about the 25 cafes that are in, you know, the financial district in just like 2 or 3 blocks? But Starbucks wants their logo, and Pete's wants their logo, and, you know, all Phil's wants their logo. You're not gonna be able to get your logo. We need to have interoperable cups and containers that can work in any business. So, you know, so we actually can get to, because no hauler wants to change their entire optical sorting line to be able to find brands. What they want to be able to do is find, oh, all the cups, all the containers, for example.
All right, thank
Totally,
you. So
totally agree.
We're almost at the hour. We only have 5 minutes left. I think we talked about a lot of different topics here. Obviously, we talked about consumer adoption. We need to make it easy for them. It needs to be as mindless as having a to-go cup. Businesses have to feel like it's easy for them. It's part of their operations. It's not more expensive, and that consumers actually want to use it. We talked about how cities could help out through the levies that they have, or maybe having a MRF, or putting into place some infrastructure, and that there's a ton of innovation going out there across the value chain. And maybe people like Rich and Michael will be collaborating in the future from an interoperability perspective. With just 5 minutes left, I'm going to ask you guys just to close up and give closing thoughts on maybe 1 or 2 things that you hope to see, either from the business side or, you know, the government side, that would really help reusables be much more prevalent over the next 5 years. So if you thought about what would need to happen over the next 6 months that could make reusables more ubiquitous over the next 5 years, would love to get your closing thoughts. Who wants to start? That's a big question.
How to solve the problem.
Yes.
I don't have a specific answer for that, but I think if you are a policymaker, have faith that businesses will adjust quickly to anything that you will throw at them. I've heard that from a business owner themselves. They'll switch in 2 weeks because they have to, and businesses are designed to do so. And if you are a consumer, you need to do your research, follow your waste stream, and see what's actually happening to it. And I think a lot of our stories here are because we have followed that waste stream and seen the back end and seen that it's not working. And that's why we've all, you know, launched our own companies and initiatives and projects to fight this. So I think at least if you follow your own waste stream, you'll have the motivation to take 1 step, to have 1 more conversation, etc. Problem solved, right?
I'll go next. I think I'm excited for the new administration. I think that there's going to be in this coming year of linking plastics production and even the compostable ones, the waste we're generating, with greenhouse gas emissions and ultimately climate change. And so I think if we can figure out our communication potential to the general public and the mass media, that, you know, keep it in the ground. This is a climate issue. It's a public health issue. And, you know, I think that in the next few months, year, I would just love to see more development on these types of policies. I won't have time to talk about all of it right now, but I would welcome folks to join us at upstreamsolutions.org. And stay tuned, because we're testing out new models and policies. We're working on building a software tracking tool to support large accounts in their transition to reusability, and to monitor and measure the actual impacts of those changes. But yeah, the policies, we're going to be coming out with a policy toolkit by mid-year. And in that, we'll have kind of the policy playbook, you know, the handbook. Here's what you got to do. Here are the people you got to talk to, because the most important thing you can do right now is call, email, write, drop in to your elected officials and say that whatever it is, your points of like, we don't want to see this trash anymore in our community. We don't want to see blah, blah, blah. And so if you can become, active in your local democracy, and we've got all kinds of tools and stuff to help you on our website.
Okay, I guess that leaves me. I'll do my best to keep it short. I think, first, Michael and Cup Zero and Reedish are currently building circular infrastructure, right? Like we have washing facilities, we have people collecting, delivering, we have all this, we're building it. I think what we need, to Sam's point, we need people to use it, right? Like we need everyone out there to spend less time worrying about whether or not a plastic packet is recyclable. Skip that, get on the phone to your elected officials and just let them know that this waste situation is unacceptable, and join groups that are pushing for ERP and, skipping the stuff like straws and everything else, right? Like that's where we need time and effort, and also spread the word about our services. If you work at a building, or if you go to a nightclub, or if you do anything, right? Like Reedish can serve them today in New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut, like let them know, tell them to reach out to Reedish, tell them to reach out to Cup Zero. Like that's how we're going to continue building this infrastructure and growing it so that we can hopefully cross that scale barrier. And because I took the time to make to calculate these numbers, I'm just going to end with a few. For those in New York City, worked with the Overbrook Foundation a couple years ago. We go through an estimated 23 billion disposable items per year in New York City. It's everything from individual napkins, straws, takeout containers, whatever. And that's 63 million products per day. I did some modeling with a colleague last year. If we were to replace 20 million of those out of 63 million per day, that would create as many as 6,000 jobs in New York City. At $20 an hour, that's $250 million in gross salary in New York City to just do this, and that's compared to the $500 to $600 million per year flowing to distributors and manufacturers of trash that we use to eat our food off of currently, and the tens of millions of dollars that we also spend in New York City to manage their trash that they don't have to pay for. So I like to say that, and I also say like we need to make this a climate issue, right? Reedish did a life cycle analysis, and I'll cut to the short. Like if we were to replace 1.5 million single-use clamshells every day for a year, that would be taking 23,000 cars off the road for an entire year. So how many other things? And don't quote me on that because that's my own back of the envelopes. But like those are the things we need to start realizing is if we're going to conquer climate change and waste, like we need to connect this to these goals as well. Anyway, that's my best attempt at brief.
Thank you. And I so appreciate the fact that you did submit those numbers to everyone on the panel. So with that, we're closing up. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about reusable cities. We hope you found it informative. I will go ahead and put my email in the chat, and if the other panelists want to do it as well, please do. If you ever have any questions, please reach out, and I highly, highly recommend the upstream.org website. They're a wonderful organization, really setting us on a path to try to get reusables across the country. So please support their work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm just putting it in. Okay, there you go. All righty. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye.